welcome. You've had a good lunch with some friends now.
Oh, indeed.
And so you're ready to tell us all about your life and work.
I'll have a go.
Good. Okay. Well, we're very privileged. This is a major exhibition, I think, and it's one which comes. Is it? Am I right in thinking this is your 80th year?
Indeed, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I think it's quite an extraordinary body of work to have produced here. And let me just say, on my own part, first of all, thank you very much for sharing it with us. You've 80 years. That's a long life. It must have been a very rich life in many ways, and it's clearly going to have infiltrated its way and in some ways influence the kind of art that you make. But before we get on to that kind of domain, can we just hear a little bit about the life itself? Because you were born in London.
Yes, I was born in London in 1931, and we lived in an artist's apartment, an artist called Walter Spindler, who was one of the Oscar Wilde group, in fact, and had retired quietly to London. My father was looking after him and acting as his secretary, and Walter, with tremendous generosity, moved out of his apartment in order that my father and his new wife could move in, and he went around the corner and lived in the Grosvenor Hotel. I remember him, in fact, going visits to London when I was about 7, and he was very gentle person, lovely man, and I can remember him reading poems out of an A.A. Milne book, and I had very happy memories of him.
Well, it must be because how old were you when you left there?
Well, I was only 2, in fact, when we left.
And you have a memory of him reading to you?
Only afterwards, when we went back and he'd gone back into the apartment. We were living in Whitstable at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So I was, as I say, about 7 years old then.
And why did you move out to Whitstable?
Well, my brother had a double mastoid operation, and the doctor advised that he should go and live in a rather nicer climate and down by the sea. So we moved to Whitstable.
But you weren't there for long?
No, we were there until I was 7,
Mm-hmm.
and then we moved out into the country near Dargate, where we stayed for the rest of my youth.
And what kind of countryside is that around there?
What kind of countryside? Wooded hills, and then not very far away you could walk down to the marshes which lead out to the sea. So the background really of landscape in my own mind, my youth, is a mixture of these two things. Lovely farmland with orchards and rolling hillsides, and then the marshes, the flat land and the marsh and the sea and the beach.
So the wild and for a young lad, the interesting but dangerous, and the very orderly and cultivated.
Yes, and in those days there was little fear of children going where they wanted, and so as soon as we moved into that house in the country, I would be off on walks with a dog into the woods on my own. Without any fear, and my parents had no fear in those days of my being out in those sort of conditions.
And you were there, you went to school there, you grew up there, and you lived with your mother and your father?
And my brother, yes.
And your brother, yeah. in that house. And where did you go to school?
I went to school in Whitstable, and then I got a scholarship to Faversham Grammar School.
Uh-huh.
And after that to the art school in Canterbury.
What was that like then? That must have been in the
1947 I went to the art college, art school as it was then, small art school. I was the only young man in my class. It was a very small institution really.
How many students were there?
Oh, I suppose about 150.
Oh, it was quite small. Yeah.
Yes, 20 in my class.
Yeah. And do you remember any of your teachers there with?
Oh yes, I do. They were good teachers, in fact, and one of them, Jim Palmer, was a very good painter, died recently, and he remained a good friend. He was a very good teacher, very enthusiastic. We liked his own work. He was a good draftsman, good colourist, a good influence. And the other one was Alec Vickerman, very good draftsman again, very enthusiastic. They were young, 30-year-olds, just come from the Royal College. And for me, with my background, which was a very quiet, rural one, it was really a revelation, in a sense, to go into that comparatively modest art school and come in contact suddenly with all sorts of things which I had known nothing about. They talked about ballet, and Jim Palmer and one of the dress design people taught ballroom dancing, and had a music club, he used to play records. He talked about poetry, and this was tremendously stimulating.
And this was not part of the curriculum, was it? Or
Oh no,
just came out of the culture of the place?
Yes, you were suddenly in contact with somebody who was a very cultured man.
That must have been really quite an eye-opener, and in many ways. Was your household, your mother and father, and were they very interested in art?
Not especially, no. They respected art and they respected artists, and we had a good collection of books in the house. I think that's really as far as it went.
So where do you think that your own interest in making drawing and painting came from?
I don't know where it came from, and it certainly developed quite late. As a young boy, to a large extent, I think I was more interested in being out in the fields than I was at being at home. My brother was a great reader, he became a journalist. I wasn't particularly diligent at school, I'm afraid rather the opposite.
I'm glad to hear it.
But I think I've told the story already that when I was leaving, we had a new Scottish art master who'd been in the war, and he was very lively. He wasn't particularly diligent about teaching. He used to sit at the front of the class painting the most beautiful flower paintings and smoking. He'd put his cigarette down and say, "Keep quiet." But he seemed to recognise something that I had to offer. And when I was leaving, he said, what are you going to do when you leave? And I said, I don't know, I just want to leave. Disgusting, really. He said, I think you should go to art college. And so I went along with some drawings, and they said, yes, you'll come. That's all right, you'll get your school certificate, and we'll take you in.
And that was the
That was the beginning of it, yes. And on the first morning, I went into the life class, was struggling away, and I suddenly realised that this is actually what I wanted to do. I remember my wife and I went to hear Kazuo Ishiguro recently, talking about his work. And he stressed the importance of luck in one's life. And I think I have been extremely lucky, first of all in that respect, that somebody pointed me in the right direction right at the beginning. So many people have to put up with frustration. And I didn't. I was very, very fortunate.
But I'm interested that you said just a moment ago that you went to the straight into the life class. You were struggling.
This was the art school. This was before the slate.
This was before the slate.
Oh yes, yes.
But it was in the context of the struggle that you also realised this is something that you wanted to do.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was that you relished the challenge of making art.
Yes. And it was, I think, in a way, the fact that we were all there together. I was suddenly part of a sort of fighting force. You know, you were struggling with this dreadful problem of a nude woman standing in front of you, which was a shock anyhow, and then trying to make a drawing of this object. There's a fearsome thing in front of you. Quite an experience.